Fiancée announces she is bisexual after a solo trip to a wedding. Betty and I had always been a solid couple, or so I thought. We'd been together for a few years and had just gotten engaged in January. The plan was simple: save up for a year, have the wedding we wanted, and start the next chapter of our lives together. After the engagement, we moved in together, settling into a routine that felt comfortable and right. Life was good, predictable, but good. Everything seemed to be on track until May, when Betty was invited to be a bridesmaid at one of her friends' weddings. It was a 5-day affair, a full-on celebration with all the bells and whistles. I couldn't go because of work commitments, so Betty went solo. She was excited to see old friends, and when she came back, she told me all about how much fun she had. But as the days passed, something changed. Betty became distant, moody, and withdrawn. She wasn't the same person who had left for that wedding. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. I tried to be supportive, asking if she wanted to talk, but she kept brushing me off. I was relieved when she decided to see a therapist, hoping it would help her sort out whatever was bothering her. She went to several sessions, and I noticed that she seemed a little better afterward, but there was still a distance between us, a gap that I couldn't bridge. Then, one Saturday morning, Betty sat me down for a serious conversation. I could tell she was nervous, and that made me nervous too. She started by telling me about her conservative upbringing and how it had forced her to suppress parts of herself for years. Even after she left home for college, she had continued to deny certain aspects of who she was. But at the wedding, she had met someone, a woman, the wife of one of her college friends, and it had triggered something in her. Over the course of the wedding festivities, Betty found herself feeling romantic and sexual attraction towards this woman, and it made her realize something profound: she was bisexual. I was stunned. Not by the fact that Betty was bisexual, but by how much she had been struggling with this alone. I told her that I was happy she felt safe enough to share this with me, that it didn't change how I felt about her. It was an emotional moment for both of us, a moment where I thought we were on the same page, ready to face this new understanding of her identity together. But then she asked me how I felt about her exploring this side of herself now that it was out in the open. She said she wanted to experience her attraction to women in a more personal way, which caught me off guard. I tried to be open-minded, even suggested that maybe we could explore it together, maybe have a threesome with another woman so she could experience it without stepping outside our relationship. But that wasn't what she wanted. She wanted a one-on-one experience with another woman, something she felt she couldn't do with me present. Hearing that felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about her being bisexual, it was the fact that she wanted to be with someone else, and it felt like she was asking for permission to have an affair. I told her that I wasn't comfortable with that it felt like a betrayal. I asked if she wanted to call off the wedding or take a break to figure out what she really wanted. But she was adamant that she still loved me, that she still wanted to marry me. She just felt like she had to explore these feelings before we settled down together. That's when I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since the conversation started: had she done anything inappropriate at the wedding? Had she cheated on me? She hesitated but finally admitted that she had danced with the woman at the reception and that they had kissed at the end of the night. She insisted that nothing else happened, and that she hadn't been talking to anyone or planning anything behind my back. But it didn't matter. The fact that she had kept this from me, that she had even kissed someone else, felt like a breach of trust. Betty knew she had dropped a bombshell on me, and she didn't expect me to have all the answers right away. She asked me to keep an open mind, to keep talking about it. I couldn't make any promises, but I agreed to think about it, to do some research, and to talk to people who might have experience with this sort of thing. I even talked to a coworker who had an open marriage, trying to understand how they made it work. But it all felt foreign to me. Meanwhile, I was trying to process everything. My brother, who had come out as gay when I was 16, had been a huge influence in shaping my understanding of relationships and sexuality. My parents had been supportive of him, and I grew up in a household that was open-minded and accepting. But this was different. This wasn't just about Betty's sexuality, it was about our relationship, our future, and whether we could survive this revelation. I started going to a support group, reading books, doing everything I could to make sense of what was happening. I wanted to be there for Betty, but I also had to take care of myself. After a couple of weeks, I sat Betty down to talk about where we were headed. I had found us a couples therapist, and I suggested we postpone the wedding for 6 months to give us time to figure things out. I even gave her one of the books I had finished, hoping it would help her understand where I was coming from. But when I mentioned the possibility of me dating other people, it was like a switch flipped in her. Betty shut down, barely giving me one-word answers, and when she did speak, it was clear she hadn't even considered that I might want to explore my own options. It was like she expected me to just wait for her while she figured herself out, without considering that I might have needs and desires of my own. That night, things came to a head. The tension had been building for days, and it finally boiled over. Betty accused me of using the idea of an open relationship as a way to punish her, of being vindictive by suggesting that I might date other women. She said she just wanted some grace to explore her feelings, and that I was being unreasonable. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I reminded her that she had cheated on me, maybe not in a big way, but she had still kissed someone else, and that she was asking for an open-ended hall pass to do it again. I told her that some of our friends had already confirmed that she had asked them to keep what happened at the wedding a secret from me, which made me question what else she might be hiding. I asked her if she thought it was fair for her to sleep with other people while I just waited at home, hoping she would eventually come back to me. The argument spiraled from there, with both of us saying things we probably shouldn't have. In the end, I laid out 3 options for how we could move forward. 1. Monogamy. We postponed the wedding, go to couples counseling, and agree to no experimenting. If we get to a good place, we can go ahead with the wedding, but only with a prenup to protect me if she changes her mind or cheats again. 2. Open relationship. We both date other people, and she can figure out her sexuality on her own terms. After a year or so, we can see if marriage is still on the table. 3. Full separation. She moves out, and we both live our lives separately. If she decides she wants monogamy with me later, and if I haven't moved on, we could consider starting fresh, but it would be a new beginning, not just picking up where we left off. Betty didn't know what to say. She said she needed some space to think and decided to stay with friends for a few days. I told her before she left that if she ended up cheating while she was gone, she shouldn't bother coming back except to collect her things. The next morning, I got a text from her that simply said, "I'm so sorry." I tried to call her, but it went straight to voicemail. I wasn't going to chase after her, so I decided to wait until she was ready to talk. During that time, I sent out cards to everyone who had received our "save the date" notices, telling them that the wedding was cancelled due to new circumstances. I kept the explanation vague, but I knew people would speculate, and I was bracing myself for the questions that would inevitably come. A few days later, Betty finally called. She said she had talked to her therapist and some friends and that she wanted to come home and work things out. We agreed to meet at the house and talk over dinner. That night, we both apologized for the things we said during our argument. Betty told me that after talking to her therapist, she had decided not to explore her bisexual urges. The idea of an open relationship, where I would also be free to date other people, terrified her. She said that getting married was more important to her than exploring her sexuality and that she had only wanted to see if she was missing something in her life. I asked her if she had wanted a one-night stand, just to date a woman, or if she had been considering a full relationship. She couldn't give me a clear answer, which only made me more uneasy. I told her that what she was asking for didn't sound very monogamous or fair, and she agreed. That's why she was willing to give up on exploring those feelings. But then she brought up the notes I had sent out canceling the wedding. She was upset that I had done it without talking to her first. I reminded her that she had dropped 2 huge bombshells on me, coming out as bisexual and admitting that she had cheated, and then left without really communicating, leaving me in the dark. I told her that while I hadn't said anything specific to our friends and family, people were already speculating that she had cheated. Betty tried to shift gears, saying that we could still get back on track and get married next spring. But I wasn't ready for that. I told her that now, whenever one of us was out of town, I would always be wondering if she was cheating again. The trust between us had been damaged, and I didn't think we could just sweep it under the rug and move forward like nothing had happened. I suggested that we go to couples therapy and see if we could rebuild what we had, but I wasn't willing to start planning a wedding until we knew if therapy was going to work. I also told her that if we did get married, I wanted a prenup to protect my assets and future retirement savings, and that she would forfeit any equity in a house if we bought one together. Betty protested, but I stood firm. If she planned to be faithful and not change her mind later, then the prenup wouldn't be an issue. We've been having this ongoing conversation for the last few days. Betty wants to move forward with the wedding and forget about what happened, but I'm not so sure. In a moment of clarity, I realized that I had rushed to embrace the idea of an open relationship to give Betty the freedom to explore her feelings, but now I'm not as willing to go down that path. I think separation might be the best option for both of us, giving us time to figure out what we really want and if we still want to be together. It's not what I want, but I don't want to spend the next few years together only for her to change her mind or cheat on me again. I'm trying to do what's best for both of us, but it's hard when there's so much uncertainty. We have counseling scheduled, and I hope it will help us figure out where we stand, but until we resolve this, I'm not willing to move forward with the wedding. I can't risk getting married and then dealing with the same issues down the line, possibly ending in divorce. I still love Betty, and I want to be with her, but I need to know that our relationship is built on trust and honesty. Right now, I'm not sure we have that, and until we do, I'm not willing to make any more commitments. The future is uncertain, but I'm trying to stay strong and do what's right for both of us. As the days stretched on, Betty and I navigated an awkward and tense coexistence in the same house. Our conversations were polite but strained, avoiding the elephant in the room that was the looming uncertainty of our future together. I found myself replaying every moment of our relationship in my mind, trying to pinpoint when things had started to go wrong, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Counseling sessions were scheduled, but they felt like a lifeline that was still just out of reach, something that might save us but not yet within our grasp. Until then, we were stuck in this limbo, both of us hesitant to make any sudden moves, as if one wrong step could send everything crashing down. At night, I would lie awake in bed, the silence of the house pressing in on me. Betty often slept in the guest room now, a decision we had mutually agreed upon to give each other space. But the distance between us, both physical and emotional, felt insurmountable. I missed the comfort of having her beside me, the simple act of reaching out in the dark and finding her there. But that comfort was now tinged with the bitter knowledge of what she had kept from me, of the kiss she had shared with someone else. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much had changed between us. Betty's confession had shattered the trust we had built, and while I wanted to believe that counseling could help us rebuild, a part of me couldn't shake the nagging doubt that maybe things would never be the same again. I didn't know how to reconcile the woman I had fallen in love with, who I had planned to marry, with the person who had felt the need to explore something outside of our relationship. I started spending more time with my brother, hoping that his experiences and wisdom could provide some clarity. We would sit on his porch with a couple of beers, talking late into the night. He was understanding and patient, listening without judgment as I poured out my frustrations and fears. He reminded me that relationships were complicated, that people were complicated, and that sometimes, what seemed like a betrayal could be a cry for help or an expression of something deeper that hadn't been addressed. But despite his reassurances, the doubt persisted. I knew that Betty's desire to explore her bisexuality wasn't inherently wrong. Sexuality is fluid, and everyone deserves to understand themselves fully. But the way she had gone about it, the secrecy, the cheating, even if it was just a kiss, felt like a betrayal of the foundation we had built our relationship on. I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever be able to fully trust her again, or if this crack in our foundation would continue to widen until everything collapsed. One evening, after another counseling session, Betty and I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. It was something we used to do often, a way to unwind and reconnect after a long day. But this time, the walk was filled with an uneasy silence, both of us lost in our thoughts, each step feeling like we were treading on eggshells. The counselor had suggested that we focus on the things that had brought us together in the first place, to try to remember the good times, the love we had shared before everything had gotten so complicated. But as we walked, the memories that came flooding back were bittersweet. I remembered our first date, how nervous I had been, and how Betty had laughed at my awkward attempts at conversation. I remembered the night we had danced in the kitchen of our first apartment, the radio playing softly in the background, and how I had known, in that moment, that she was the one I wanted to spend my life with. Yet now, those memories were tinged with the painful reality of our present situation. The woman beside me was still the same person who had danced with me in that kitchen, but she was also someone who had kept a part of herself hidden, someone who had made a choice that had hurt me deeply. I didn't know how to reconcile those two versions of her, didn't know if it was even possible. As we turned the corner back toward our house, Betty finally broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began, her voice hesitant. "About taking some time apart, separating for a while." I didn't say anything, waiting for her to continue. "I don't want to lose you," she said, her voice trembling. "But I also don't want to hurt you more than I already have. I'm scared that I'll never be able to make this right, that I'll lose you because of my own confusion." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of everything left unsaid. I stopped walking and turned to face her, searching her eyes for some sign of what she was really feeling. "Betty, I love you," I said quietly. "But I can't pretend that everything is okay. I can't pretend that I'm not hurt, that I'm not struggling with this." "I know," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "And that's what makes this so hard. I hate that I've put you in this position, that I've caused you so much pain. But I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I can." The honesty in her voice, the vulnerability, cut through me like a knife. This was the Betty I had fallen in love with, the woman who had always been so strong, so sure of herself. But now, she was lost, just as lost as I was. "I don't know if we can fix it either," I admitted, my own voice trembling. "Maybe we need to step back, to give ourselves the space to figure out what we really want, who we really are, without hurting each other more." She nodded, wiping away a tear. "Maybe you're right. Maybe that's what we need." We continued walking in silence, the decision we had just made settling between us like a lead weight. When we got back to the house, Betty packed a small bag and called a friend to pick her up. I watched from the doorway as she got into the car, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of finality, as if we were standing at the edge of a precipice, and there was no turning back. The next few days were some of the hardest of my life. The house felt empty without Betty, every room a reminder of what we had shared and what we had lost. I kept expecting her to walk through the door, to hear her voice calling out to me, but the silence was deafening. I threw myself into work, into the mundane tasks of daily life, anything to keep my mind from dwelling on the emptiness. But at night, when the distractions were gone, the reality of our separation hit me with full force. I missed her, missed the way she laughed, the way she curled up beside me on the couch, the way she made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. But I also knew that this time apart was necessary, that we both needed to figure out who we were and what we wanted before we could even think about being together again. We kept in touch, texting occasionally, but the conversations were brief, almost formal. It was as if we were both afraid to open up too much, afraid that one wrong word could break the fragile peace we had managed to establish. The counseling sessions continued, but now they were separate, each of us working on our own issues, trying to untangle the mess that had brought us to this point. Then, one evening, I received a message from Betty. It was simple, just a request to meet for coffee, to talk. My heart pounded as I read it, a mix of hope and fear churning in my gut. I agreed, and we set a time and place for the next day. When I walked into the cafe the next morning, I saw her sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. She looked tired, her eyes weary, but there was a determination in her expression that I hadn't seen in weeks. I sat down across from her, and for a moment, we just stared at each other, unsure of how to begin. "Thank you for meeting me," she finally said, her voice soft. "Of course," I replied, my heart racing. "What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "And I realized that I've been so focused on my own confusion, my own needs, that I didn't see how much I was hurting you. I've been selfish, and I'm sorry for that. I didn't say anything, letting her continue. I thought that exploring my sexuality would help me understand myself better, but all it did was push us further apart. I don't want that. I don't want to lose you. But I also know that I need to be honest with myself, and with you. She paused, her eyes searching mine. I think you were right. I think we need to take a break, a real break, to figure out who we are and what we want. I don't want to drag you through my confusion, and I don't want to make promises I'm not sure I can keep. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but there was also a sense of relief. This was the honesty I had been craving, the acknowledgement that things weren't okay and that we needed to address that before we could move forward. I agree, I said quietly. I think it's the best thing for both of us right now. I love you, Betty, but we need to figure this out separately. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she nodded, a small, sad smile on her lips. I love you too. I really do. And maybe, once we've had some time, we can find our way back to each other. But for now, I think this is goodbye. It felt like a knife twisting in my chest, but I knew she was right. We needed to say goodbye, at least for now, to give ourselves the space to heal, to grow, and to figure out what we really wanted out of life. We finished our coffee in silence, the weight of the moment hanging between us. When we stood to leave, we hugged tightly, neither of us wanting to let go. But eventually, we did, and as I watched her walk away, a part of me felt like it was walking away with her. The days and weeks that followed were some of the hardest I had ever faced. I was alone now, truly alone, and the future felt uncertain, like I was standing at a crossroads with no idea which path to take. But there was also a strange sense of freedom, of possibility. I could start over, build a life for myself that was based on what I really wanted, not just what I had thought I wanted. I focused on my own healing, throwing myself into work, into my hobbies, into spending time with friends and family. The counseling sessions continued, and I found that, slowly, I was beginning to understand myself better, to understand what I needed and what I was willing to accept in a relationship. Betty and I stayed in touch, but it was sporadic, and each conversation felt like a reminder of the distance that had grown between us. I didn't know if we would ever find our way back to each other, and that uncertainty was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in a long time, I was truly on my own, and while it was scary, it was also empowering. I began to think more seriously about my future, about what I wanted out of life. I started setting new goals for myself, exploring new interests, and slowly, the pain of the breakup began to fade. I realized that I had been holding on to the idea of a future with Betty so tightly that I hadn't allowed myself to see other possibilities, other paths that could lead to happiness. One day, a few months after our breakup, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Betty. I hesitated before opening it, my heart pounding with anticipation and dread. Inside, I found a heartfelt note, written in her familiar handwriting. She talked about how much she had grown during our time apart, how she had come to terms with her sexuality and what it meant for her. She thanked me for being patient, for giving her the space to figure things out, and for all the love we had shared. But she also said that she had realized something important. As much as she loved me, she needed to fully explore who she was before she could commit to anyone else. She didn't want to hurt me again, didn't want to risk another heartbreak. She had decided to move to a different city, to start fresh and focus on her own journey. I read the letter over and over, my emotions a tangled mess. There was sadness, of course, but also a sense of closure. This was the final chapter of our relationship, and while it hurt, it also felt like the right decision for both of us. We had loved each other deeply, but sometimes love wasn't enough. Sometimes, the best thing you could do for someone you loved was to let them go. As I put the letter down, I felt a strange sense of peace. The future was still uncertain, but I knew that I had done everything I could to make things work with Betty. And now, it was time to move forward, to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead, and to trust that, in the end, everything would be okay. Life moved on. I threw myself into new projects, traveled, met new people, and slowly, the pain of the past began to fade into the background. I still thought about Betty from time to time, wondering how she was doing, if she had found what she was looking for. But those thoughts were fleeting, like echoes of a distant memory. And then, one day, I found myself standing at another crossroads, but this time, I was ready. I had grown, learned, and healed, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The future was wide open, full of potential, and for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about what lay ahead. As I took that first step forward, leaving the past behind, I knew that I was finally ready to embrace the next chapter of my life, whatever it might bring. And with that, I walked confidently into the unknown, ready to face whatever the future held. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment and follow for more stories.